Hello and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be installing carburetors on a Honda Shadow 1100 motorcycle, and here we're starting by putting the clamp on the carburetor insulator. And if you take notice here, I'll try to show you, there's a little groove and a little tab on the clamp that sits in. And then when you sit the insulator down on the cylinder head, that little notched out groove only goes on one way. And there, I've tried to show you as good as I can. And here's another one, and we're going to install the clamp and just repeat the same procedure as the first one we installed. And furthermore, when I removed the carburetors, some of these stayed on the head, some didn't, but I removed the ones that didn't come with the carburetors and felt it would be easier to put them on. Of course, now first before you put the carburetors back on. And they're hard to sort of a snug fit, but I think they're back in. They do, like I say, not slide on easy. And there you can see what I'm saying, where the hookup is to check the synchronize the carburetors to screw. That's where that groove sits down over. And again, that's where you would be if you were synchronizing the carburetors. You would hook the gauge too. And here, move some items out of the way and let you see where the other one sits down in, just so you know how to again line them up when you're installing yours. Now we're going to put the clamps on the top of them, but of course not tighten them until we put the carburetors down in, and that's a pretty simple procedure on that. Yeah, I know the first motorcycle I owned, these carburetor insulators were pathetic. They were cracked and taped up with electrical tape. The bike had sat outside for years and they were a mess, but yeah, on this they're in good shape. And there is the carburetors freshly rebuilt and cleaned. As again, earlier videos covered the whole procedure. And we're going to take and just you got to sort of go in on an angle if you watch, and then give it about a quarter of a turn and wiggle and jiggle. And eventually, it actually went in a lot easier than it came out. Again, those insulators, some of them stuck when I took it out, which made clearance a problem. Although we have them back in the frame now, we're still not home free because we have to get them pushed down in the insulators and make sure no vacuum hoses or anything are in the way. But I think we're going to get it here. Again, they don't give you lots of room to work on a motorcycle, and there you can see I'm pushing them down in. It's helping out on this project. It's a warm day. I'm working on this. It's probably around 80 degrees, and again, they're going slow but sure. There we go. Unlike the one on the left side of the bike, due to the throttle cables and hoses and that, this one you can see on the left side of the bike being pushed in. Again, there was too many items in the way to get a good view on the other one, and now that it's in, we can take and tighten the carburetor insulator clamps with a number 2 screwdriver I am using to do this. And now there's just one more to tighten on the insulators, on the ones between the carburetor and the cylinder head. And then we can move on to the next step on this, installing the carburetors. Or more accurately, the next steps will be going into hooking up vacuum hoses and fuel lines and such. But again, all in good order, which we will show you the detailed procedure. Okay, and here we're first hooking up this fuel line that comes from the fuel pump down under the bike on the carburetor. and that just pushes down on with that clamp that's on it from the factory. Now here we're going to take and hook up our choke on the one carburetor. Okay, we'll zoom in here and let you have a close look at this. You need the spring for the starter enrichment valve. Slide that on and then hook the starter enrichment valve on itself and take and put it back into the hole in the carburetor. The point, of course, goes in towards the carburetor for the starter enrichment valve, and once you set it in, just take the plastic nut and start turning it into the carburetor body. In addition, it's worth mentioning the plastic threads going into the aluminum body on the carburetor. It does not turn in real easy, but it does go. But it seems like they're fine thread and it goes on forever. You just keep turning and there's never an end to it. And now I've turned it as far as I can with my fingers. I'm going to just snug it up with these long needle nose pliers, just about a half a turn past. Also a 14 millimeter or 13 wrench will fit on it, but the pliers are handy. And I'm going to take these pliers and fish this vent tube back in and hook it back on. You can see where that goes into. Okay, now I'll get this coolant hose out of your way. You can see what I'm doing. I'm going to put the fuel line back on the carburetor on the left side of the motorcycle. We did the right one earlier, which was easy, and this I'm going to need a little help with these long needle nose pliers to force it down on. It's being stubborn. Well, of course you can't get to it real good, but that is back on. Yeah, not quite. I thought it went, but just being stubborn as can be. And I'm just going to take and push it here with my thumb. It's about all I can get in there. And see once here if it will finally go. And there you can see it is on the whole way like it should be. And now we're going to hook up our other starting enrichment valve on the left side. No big surprises on this starting enrichment valve. It's the same principle as the other one. Once you get the valve itself situated into the carburetor, you just take and turn the plastic nut as far as you can with your fingers, and then I'm going to again use the needle nose pliers again, and we'll just snug it up. Again, it don't have to be real tight. It's plastic. It would not take much to strip it, and I don't feel like ordering one. I'm sure they are available. Ordering another cable. And now we're going to put the bracket on that holds the throttle cables in place and organizes them. Furthermore, it's worth noting this only goes on one way, and you can see like the part there, like the triangle shape points towards the rear of the bike, and there's two screws that hold it, and again both screws are totally different. You're not going to interchange the screws between the holes because one is larger than the other one. As you notice, with the cables and that coolant line in the way, it's sort of a pain in theory, but I'm well away on this project. It probably is worthy of draining the coolant before doing this and getting that coolant hose out of your way, but I'm not going to at this stage. But if you would be minded, you could do that. And now we're going to take and get our cables, both the push and the pull cable, into place. Yes, interestingly, that first motorcycle I owned, I was talking about the worn out the insulators for the carburetors. I was riding it one time and I went to leave a friend's house and one of the throttle cables broke, and I had to let it sit there a couple of days while I ordered the new cables. But anyhow, we're putting these back into the brackets, and I just loosened the one nut. I didn't nut towards the front of the bike I didn't mess with, so they should be still in adjustment. I could say just the one with the front loosened enough that it came out. And now we're going to take the pull cable and we're going to take and hook it up first after we take and open the throttle on the carburetor, and you can see you slide it in the hole, push in, and then it goes back around into the groove in the linkage on the carburetor. Although we didn't succeed the first time. I thought I had it, but no such luck. Now we'll try this again. That time it went. Okay, and that concludes hooking up the pull cable. Now we need to do the push cable, and it works out here that I think to get it I'm going to have to take it back out of the bracket momentarily. At least I'm going to find this to be the easiest. Then we'll work it around, and you can see we're going to just hook it up like we did the other cable. Now that it's in, we can set it back down in the groove that's in the linkage, and eventually here we can take and get it hooked in. Now those here, I'm trying to show you as good as I can on this. It's a lot of items in the way. Now the good news, I succeeded at getting the cable in the eye hole in the throttle linkage. On the bad news, I can't get it up around the pulley, so we're going to cheat here and get some help with those needle nose pliers, and there it is back in. And now we can take and just open the throttle up here. I think it's going to take, and we can eventually get this hooked back into the throttle linkage bracket. Without a doubt, the push cable is being contrary compared to the pull cable. That went really easy, but one way or the other, well, it's back in now. Just have to work it back in, and now we can just retighten the little 10mm nut, which eventually I will tighten it with the wrench, but just for now get it finger tight that it won't fall back out of the bracket. And that concludes the throttle cables. Now that the cables are basically completed, we're going to take and get back on top here of the bike. I'm tired of kneeling down at the side of it anyhow, and we're going to hook up this, what they call the sub air cleaner, and that's just it's sort of a tight fit, shoves up in like in front of the carburetors, and you got to sort of get it wiggled around that you can get the hoses without them getting pitched shut into place. Furthermore, as with all my more recent videos, in the description will be timestamps included if you want to jump to just a particular part to see how something goes into place. It'll give you the opportunity. For one, this part we're doing right now, perhaps you forgot how it went and you don't need to watch the whole procedure, and there you go. And we just have one more of the hose to hook up to the outer carburetor. And so many times in this project, I'm going to resort to the needle nose pliers, except I'm going to use the ones that have more of an angle on them. And there it does shove down into place. And again, those hoses don't go on the outside of the frame, but the inside of the frame. That's sort of, I think you can see that, but just wanted to point that out. Okay, now that we have this in place, we'll give you a close look at how it does go in, or as close as I can get it to go in. Basically, as long as it's up in, out of the way when we go to put the rest of the carburetor ductwork on. And here you can see those throttle cables where they were hooked up. And take and move some stuff here out of the way. And we'll go get that wire hooked back into the frame under the clamps of the bike. Will help out. Yeah, I try to, when I take stuff apart like these wire looms and that, put stuff back in as close as you can to where the factory had it. That way and we're going to hook up the clutch cable. That's simple enough, slides up in under the bracket that goes under the bolt of the head. And there is this duct work for the carburetors, this next piece that goes in. If you noticed, I shoved the end that goes on the frame of the bike before I worried about the carburetors. Now that that's on, see if I can get the one here on the one carburetor, which I have started now. This is the second part of the ductwork that goes on. On a side note, before you put the ductwork on, be sure the clamps are in place. I didn't show it because my clamps, I loosened them. They never fell off of it when I took them apart, but be sure the clamps are back in place before you do this step we're completing right now. Okay, now there that's on. Now we just have to get the ends down on the carburetor itself. Once they're successfully in place, you can see there's a notch. They only sit on one way, and that notch in the ductwork lines up with that molded into the carburetor side. And here, there is, you can see a top view looking down on them. Additionally, I want to point out there's a little arrow molded into this that lines up with this little mark on the other part when you put it in. And indeed, the two arrows help be sure you put it back where it belongs. And now we're going to take here and we're going to start tightening up some of these clamps for this ductwork. I'm trying to get a light in here, but I'm going to start here up top and tighten the one right here that's nice and easy to get to. And you want to be sure you do tighten these, because if you don't, you put everything back on the tank and all, and then you'll have an air leak and the bike won't run as good as it should. So now's the time before, and with it all back together again, you're probably not going to get a lot of these. And that was pretty, again, they're not real big screws. Tighten them, but don't go overkill. And now we're going to tighten down here on the carburetor. You can see where we're reaching in behind that fuel line that hooks into the carburetor on the right side of the bike. Okay, now we're moved over on the left side of the bike again. Move some stuff out of the way and we'll tighten another one down below the frame here. Now I'm showing you as good as I can. Again, it's not a lot of stuff in the way, and the camera keeps wanting my hands messing the focus up. Sorry about that. And tightening this next one, I'm going to use an extension here, about a foot long. Again, a little ratcheting tool there, and turn it in until I get it started, and then we'll just crank it tight with that little ratcheting tool. And if you look when I pulled the extension out, it's actually a wobble extension. It gives the socket a little room to, again, wobble back and forth to work into a tight place. Now we're going to hook the hose back on to the crankcase breather storage tank. There's actually two that goes on it. I'll get the one from the bottom, which we did, and then we're going to take and put, there's a washer that sits down in and this 10mm socket, I believe it is. I'm just going to use the driver tool to tighten it back in and hold it in place. Okay, now I'm going to say that is good enough, and now we're going to take and work here on the side, and we'll hook the other hose up to the breather tank. And that, you can see, just comes in. That's not really that hard to get to, and you have to sort of support the plastic tank so it don't push upwards when you're pushing the hose on. And there's basically pretty much on. And then this, once we get it in, we can just take merely and squeeze this clamp with our fingers part of the way in. And now we're going to have to go grab the pliers anyhow. Okay, next step's easy. We're going to take and put the screw that holds this bracket that holds the spark plug wire going to the rear cylinder on the right side back against the carburetor and tighten that. That was easy. I'm going to rehook up the coolant overflow hose. I unhooked it because when I first tried pulling the carburetors out with it in place, I kept getting caught on it, so I unhooked it. And I did get it without removing those side covers at the fork with, again, the pliers. This is the same way I'm going to hook it back up. And maybe if you took yours apart, maybe you could get it without removing this, but I did, like I say, take the overflow hose off, and there it is back on. And just a little bit more. Okay, next step, we can start making this look like a motorcycle again. We're going to be putting the gas tank back on. It would probably work easier if you had somebody to hold the handlebars while you did it, but I'm going to take it. Tank's empty. I drained it. If you watched the disassembly video, I drained the gas out of it, which was old gas anyhow, that was about 4 or 5 years old. And that's back in place. And now, once we have that, we're going to hook up this hose at the bottom of the tank at the rear on the right side. Additionally, here I'll give you a better view of this. Let me get this put on the whole way, and then I'll lift it up and you can see where it does go on the bottom of the tank. You actually, when you're hooking it up, you just sort of work by feel, but that's the location. And now we'll hook up the fuel supply line from the tank down to the fuel pump next in order. Without a doubt, you don't want to forget to hook this up, because when you turn the fuel valve on, you'd have gas running every place. But it's a tight fit. Of course, again, I feel good and secure on it, and there that is on. And now we're going to take this long bolt and the rubber grommet that sits down, and we're going to take and get that started in before we tighten it up completely. There, I'll show you close up. There it is. Okay, next, logically, we're going to move here to the front of part of the tank and put this washer in that sits down. You can see the design of the washer. It's made special to sit down in that rubber grommet, and it's the long bolt, but it's the one with the 8mm head. The other one, I believe, is a 12mm head. And once we get it lined up, it's being a little stubborn, but again, the back bolt's not tightened up or anything, so it should give us enough freedom of movement. And it did start in, and there's our 8mm socket to tighten it with. I know, actually, this is the first motorcycle I've dealt with that had a bolt of both the front and the rear of the tank, because every other motorcycle I've had, the front part of the tank, like my Yamaha I have, there's like grooves, like hooks that come out from the frame that sits down in, and then you only have one bolt in the back. But okay, now we're just merely going to tighten the rear bolt up, and there is our 12mm socket. Next up is the seat, and you notice the hook like molded into the fiberglass, and that just goes into where I'm pointing on the bike. It hooks down in, and it just sort of, once you find the spot, it just sort of slide it forward, and there we go. There it went right into place, and now we have to put the 2 bolts in the rear of it, and that is these Allen keys that are 5mm, at least on this bike. I'm sure most of them are, unless somebody changed them over the years. And just take and use about a 6 long extension, and I'm just going to start turning them in without the ratchet. Now we'll throw the ratchet on it. The seat cushioning actually makes it a little hard to get the Allen key into the head of the bolt. Actually, it'd be easier. I have some T-handle Allen keys, but I didn't go get them for this. It actually probably would have been easier to have started in with the T-handle, because it would have been thinner. It wouldn't have been as much trouble to have started it in with the seat cushion. But anyhow, it is going into place like it should. And once they're in, it's not going to go anyplace. Or at least hope it doesn't go anyplace. That'd be something. If the seat fall off the bike, that wouldn't be good. But anyhow, there we're tightening them up the last little bit. Now we just have to take and put the rear seat cushion on. Same principle as the front. It has a little tab in it that goes right into that. That's molded in the rear part of the bracket of the front part of the seat. And there is right here. This just sits down on this stud. And we have a washer here that actually goes on first. I had forgot. And then this acorn nut goes on top to hold the rear seat cushion. Okay, now we've got that on, and we're going to take and grab a ratchet here in a second, and we'll tighten it up the rest of the way. And this is a 10mm, I believe. And nearing completion, take and hook the battery terminal back up. These extra wires are for extra LED lights that was put on this bike. Yours may or may not have similar deal, but the main battery cable was down underneath these exterior wires. And that is definitely a 10mm. Used the socket and the ratchet on it since it was handy close by. Furthermore, due to the extra wiring the person put on this bike, that probably would have went like the rear one does. The terminal would actually went up on top of the post instead of on the side, but oh well, this I am sure is basically how it should have been. And I always think it's a good idea, which I did. I hooked the positive up first and put the cover on it before we hooked the negative up. That way hopefully prevent any fireworks from getting metal against the wrench against metal. It is worth mentioning, I made my life a little bit hard on myself here. I should have hooked the terminals up before putting the seat back on, but well, now you've been handed this piece of advice, and that's, again, everything's back in place. I'm just giving you an overview, and now we can put the side cover back on. That and those little tabs, which I was pointing to in the frame, of course the side cover at the top snaps right into those. There's one goes in, and there's the other one going in, and it latches right in place, and there it is back on. And there's another acorn nut here on the bottom that holds it. Alrighty, now it's time to take. I put these turn signals back on temporarily when I unbolted the sissy bar on the bike, or the backrest for the passenger, whatever you want to call it. But now I'm going to take them back out and lay the turn signals down to the side carefully, and then do the same on the repeat on the right side of the bike. Okay, now we can grab our backrest and we can slide that back in, because again the turn signals will take and sit. The backrest goes over top the turn signals, and we'll get the other one back up. And this is something, if you had an extra set of hands, would be a great assistance. But I don't have an extra set of hands here at the time, so we'll watch and you can imitate, if you don't, how I somehow pull this off. It's sort of gravity's holding it just wedged in. And now once we get a bolt or so in it, will be good. And there I did have one handy, and it started in. Get the other one here in, but I'm not going to tighten any of them completely till I start the ones in on the left side of the motorcycle. Alrighty, they are started in. Now we can tighten them up. And that pretty much, we're nearing the completion of this project. Just get these tightened and there's no more to do. Now, I hope you found the information in this helpful. And again, be sure to check out the timestamps I mentioned earlier if there's a particular part that you need to jump to. And don't forget the other videos on working on this bike. I have one on the removal of the carburetors, disassembly of carburetors, cleaning the carburetors, reassembling the carburetors, and now this one, putting everything back together on the motorcycle. Okay, again, we're going to thank you for taking the time to watch this. Have any questions or concerns, be sure to drop them in the comments below, and please consider subscribing. Thank you.